At 18, she was sent to a widowed rancher. What happened next shocked everyone in town. Eliza Carter was only 18 when she arrived in Dust Hollow, a quiet town surrounded by wide fields and endless skies. She came with just one small suitcase and a letter folded carefully in her hand. That letter had changed her life. After her father passed away, everything had fallen apart. Their small home was sold, and the little money they had quickly disappeared. There was no one left to take care of her. No relatives wanted the responsibility. So, a decision was made for her. She was sent to live and work on a ranch. Not just any ranch, but the ranch of Thomas Hale, a widowed man who lived far outside town. People in Dust Hollow knew his name, but no one really knew him anymore. Some said he used to be kind. Others said he had become distant after his wife died. He rarely came into town, and when he did, he spoke very little. Eliza had heard the whispers during her journey. She's too young for that place. That man hasn't spoken properly in years. I hope she knows what she's walking into, but she had no choice. The wagon stopped at the edge of the ranch just before sunset. The sky was painted in soft orange and gold, and the land stretched out as far as she could see. It was quiet, too quiet. Eliza stepped down slowly, holding her suitcase tightly. The ranch house stood ahead, simple, strong, and a little worn by time. A wooden fence surrounded it, and beyond that were open fields and a large barn. She took a deep breath. "This is home now," she whispered to herself. Before she could gather her thoughts, the front door opened. A tall man stepped out. Thomas Hale. He looked older than she expected, not because of age, but because of the tired look in his eyes. His face was calm, but there was something distant about him, like he had been living in his own world for a long time. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Eliza felt nervous, unsure of what to say. Thomas walked toward her slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. He simply took the suitcase from her hand. "You'll have your own room," he said quietly. That was all. No welcome, no explanation, just those simple words. Inside, the house was clean and organized. Everything had its place. It didn't feel empty, but it didn't feel warm either. Thomas showed her a small room at the end of the hallway. There was a bed, a wooden table, and a window that looked out over the fields. "It's yours," he said. Eliza nodded. "Thank you." He paused for a second, as if he wanted to say something more. But he didn't. Then he turned and walked away. That evening, Eliza sat by the window, watching the sun slowly disappear behind the hills. The sky grew darker, and the quiet of the ranch felt heavier. She thought about her old life, about her father, about everything she had lost. For a moment, she felt very alone. But then something caught her attention. She looked toward the front porch. There, on a small wooden table, were 2 cups of tea. Not 1, 2. She blinked, confused. Was someone else here? Or had Thomas prepared it that way? Later that night, she stepped outside carefully. The air was cool and the stars filled the sky. Thomas was sitting on the porch, looking out into the distance. He didn't turn when she came closer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eliza quietly asked, "Is this where I'll be working?" Thomas nodded slightly. "Yes." Another pause. Eliza looked at the 2 cups. "You made tea for 2, she said gently. Thomas glanced at them for a brief second. Then he said, "I suppose I did." His voice was calm, but there was something different in it now, something softer. Eliza didn't fully understand it, but she felt it. That night, as she lay in her new room, she couldn't sleep easily. Everything felt strange. Everything felt uncertain. But one thought stayed in her mind. Maybe this place wasn't exactly what people said it was. And maybe Thomas Hale wasn't either. As the wind moved quietly through the fields outside, Eliza closed her eyes and made a silent promise to herself. She would try, no matter how difficult things seemed. She would try to make a place for herself here. Because this wasn't just a new beginning. It was her only one. And without knowing it, her arrival had already begun to change something on that quiet, lonely ranch. Something that had been still for a very long time. But what that change would become, no one in Dust Hollow could have ever imagined. The next morning began before the sun had fully risen. Eliza woke up to the soft sound of movement outside her window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. But then she saw the wide fields, the wooden fence, and the early morning light spreading across the land. She quickly got dressed and stepped outside. The air was fresh and cool. Everything felt calm, but also full of quiet work waiting to be done. Thomas was already awake. He was near the barn, checking on the horses. His movements were slow and careful, like someone who had done the same work for many years. Eliza walked toward him, a little unsure. "Good morning," she said. Thomas nodded. "Morning." That was all. But this time, it didn't feel as cold as before. The days that followed were simple, but not easy. Eliza began learning the work of the ranch. She fed the chickens, carried water, cleaned tools, and helped with small repairs. At first, her hands grew tired quickly. Her steps felt slow, but she didn't complain. She kept going. Thomas noticed. He never said much, but he watched carefully. When Eliza struggled with something, he would quietly step in and show her how to do it better. He didn't explain with long words, just simple actions. And somehow that was enough. One afternoon, Eliza was trying to fix a broken fence. The wood was heavy, and the rope was hard to tie. She tried again and again, but it wouldn't hold. Frustration filled her chest. "I can't do this," she whispered to herself. Just then, Thomas appeared beside her. He didn't say anything at first. He simply took the rope, adjusted her grip, and showed her how to pull it tight. "Like this," he said. Eliza watched closely. She tried again. This time it worked. A small smile appeared on her face. "Thank you," she said. Thomas gave a short nod. But for the first time, Eliza thought she saw something different in his expression, something close to approval. As the days passed, small changes began to appear around the ranch. Eliza started waking up earlier. She worked faster. She learned more. And slowly, the quiet house didn't feel so empty anymore. Sometimes, she would hum softly while working. The sound was gentle, but it filled the space in a way that surprised even her. Thomas heard it too. At first, he ignored it, but later, he found himself pausing for a moment just to listen. One evening, a strong wind moved across the fields. Dark clouds gathered, and the air felt heavy. A storm was coming. Eliza hurried to help secure the barn. The horses were restless, moving nervously as the wind grew stronger. She tried to calm one of them, but it kept stepping back, shaking its head. "It's okay," she said softly, though her own hands were shaking. The horse didn't settle. Just as she began to panic, Thomas walked in. He moved slowly, without fear. He placed a gentle hand on the horse and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "It's all right." His voice was quiet, but firm. The horse slowly relaxed. Eliza watched in silence. There was no force, no anger, just patience. After the storm passed, everything became still again. The sky cleared and the stars returned. Eliza sat on the steps outside, feeling tired but peaceful. Thomas came out a few minutes later. For a while, they sat without speaking. Then, surprisingly, Thomas broke the silence. "You handled things well today," he said. Eliza looked at him, a little shocked. "Really?" she asked. He nodded. "You didn't give up." Eliza smiled softly. "I almost did." "But you didn't," he replied. That night felt different. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt comfortable. Over the next few days, something slowly began to grow. Not friendship, not yet, but understanding. Thomas began leaving small things for Eliza, tools she might need, water ready before she asked, even food already prepared when she returned from work. He never mentioned it, and she never asked, but she noticed. One morning, Eliza found a small wooden stool placed near her work area. It made her tasks easier. She looked around. Thomas was in the distance, working as usual. She smiled to herself. Later that evening, as the sun set across the fields, Eliza stood near the fence, watching the light fade. Thomas walked up beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said something unexpected. "This place hasn't felt like this in a long time." Eliza looked at him. "Like what?" He paused, then quietly said, "Less empty." Eliza didn't know what to say, but she understood. For the first time since she arrived, she felt something change inside her. This ranch was no longer just a place she had been sent to. It was becoming something more. And without either of them realizing it fully, the quiet life they were living was slowly turning into something that would soon catch the attention of the entire town. Because change, even small change, does not stay hidden for long. By the time a full month had passed, the ranch no longer felt like the same place. The quiet was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer heavy or lonely. It was peaceful. Eliza had become a natural part of the ranch. She moved with confidence now, waking early, finishing her work without being asked, and even helping plan the daily tasks. Thomas noticed everything. He didn't say much, as always, but his actions spoke clearly. He trusted her, and that was something no one in town would have believed. One morning, Thomas handed Eliza a small list. "We need supplies," he said. Eliza looked at the paper. "From town?" she asked. Thomas nodded. It would be her first time going into Dust Hollow since she arrived. The town looked just as she remembered. Small shops, wooden paths, and people who seemed to know each other very well. But this time, something was different. People noticed her, really noticed her. As she walked through the market, quiet conversations began to slow down. "That's her," someone whispered. "The girl from Hale's ranch," another voice said. Eliza tried to ignore it. She kept her eyes on her list and moved from one shop to another. But she could feel it, the curiosity, the questions. At the general store, an older woman greeted her with a kind smile. "You must be Eliza," she said. Eliza looked surprised. "Yes." The woman nodded. "Word travels fast around here." Eliza gave a small smile. "I can see that." The woman leaned a little closer. "How is he?" Eliza paused. She knew who she meant. "He's not what people say," Eliza replied gently. The woman's eyes softened. "I thought so," she said. When Eliza returned to the ranch later that day, she found Thomas repairing a wooden gate. "I got everything," she said, handing him the supplies. Thomas looked at her for a moment. "How was town?" Eliza hesitated. "Quiet," she said at first. Then she added, "But not really." Thomas understood. "They talked," he said. Eliza nodded. "They did." Thomas didn't seem surprised. "They always do." Over the next few days, something began to shift again. But this time, it wasn't just on the ranch. It was in the town. A few days later, Thomas needed to go into town himself. That alone was unusual. He hadn't gone in weeks. Eliza offered to come with him. For a moment, Thomas seemed unsure. Then he nodded. As they rode into Dust Hollow together, people noticed immediately. Thomas Hale was back, and he wasn't alone. The streets felt different this time. Not quiet, not distant, but full of attention. People watched as they walked side by side. Some were surprised. Some smiled. Some simply stared. At the market, a man who owned a nearby farm approached Thomas. "Good to see you again," he said. Thomas gave a small nod. The man looked at Eliza. "You've brought life back with you." Eliza felt her cheeks warm. Thomas didn't respond. But he didn't walk away either. And that alone meant something. As they continued walking, Eliza noticed something new. Thomas wasn't avoiding people anymore. He still spoke little. But he didn't hide. He stood beside her calmly, as if he no longer needed to stay distant from the world. That evening, something unexpected happened. There was a small gathering in the town square. Lanterns were lit, music played softly, and people gathered to talk and relax. Eliza watched from a distance. "It looks nice," she said. Thomas followed her gaze. He had not been to one of these gatherings in years. "Do you want to go?" she asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. The lights flickered gently in the distance. Voices filled the air. It was a place full of life. Something he had stayed away from for a long time. Finally, he said, "We can go." When they arrived, the entire square seemed to pause. People turned, not in judgment, but in surprise. Thomas Hale had returned, and he had brought someone with him. Eliza walked beside him, trying to stay calm. The soft music played around them. Children laughed nearby. Lanterns lit the night, with a warm glow. A few people greeted Thomas carefully. Others smiled at Eliza. The tension slowly faded. Then something small but important happened. Thomas turned slightly toward Eliza and said, "Stay close." His voice was quiet, but it wasn't distant. It was caring. Eliza looked at him. For the first time, she saw it clearly. He was no longer just a man living in silence. He was trying. As the night continued, they stood together near the edge of the square, watching, listening, being part of something again. And all around them, the town watched too. But this time, the whispers were different. They look right together. "He's changed." "No, he's healing." Eliza didn't hear all of it, but she felt it, the shift, the change. And as Thomas stood beside her, calm and steady under the lantern light, one truth became clear. This was no longer just a simple arrangement. This was something real, something growing. And the entire town of Dust Hollow had finally begun to see it. But what they didn't know yet was just how much more things were about to change. After that evening in the town square, nothing felt the same anymore. The change was clear, not just on the ranch, not just in Eliza, but in Thomas too. The next few weeks passed quietly, but something stronger had grown between them. They understood each other now, without needing many words. Mornings were easier. Work felt lighter. Even the long days under the sun no longer felt tiring. The ranch had become a place of calm and quiet happiness. One morning, Eliza stood near the fence, watching the horses move across the field. The sunlight touched everything in soft gold. She smiled to herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt settled, not lost, not unsure, just at peace. Behind her, Thomas walked out of the house. He paused for a moment, watching her. There was something different in his eyes now. The tired look was still there, but it was no longer heavy. It had softened. "You're up early," he said. Eliza turned slightly. "Couldn't sleep much." Thomas nodded. "Too many thoughts." Eliza gave a small laugh. "Maybe." He stepped closer, standing beside her. For a moment, they both looked out at the land. "This place suits you," Thomas said quietly. Eliza looked at him. "I think I needed it." He didn't reply right away, but his silence was no longer empty. It was thoughtful. As days passed, the town continued to notice the changes. People spoke differently now, not in whispers, but openly. At the market, the same older woman smiled when she saw Eliza again. "You look happy," she said. Eliza nodded softly. "I am." The woman glanced around and asked, "And him?" Eliza smiled a little more. "He is too in his own way." Back at the ranch, small moments became important. Shared meals, quiet conversations, simple smiles. One evening, Eliza found something unexpected. On the porch table, there were again 2 cups of tea, just like the first night she arrived. But this time it felt different. She picked one cup and sat down. A moment later, Thomas joined her. Neither of them spoke at first. They didn't need to. After a while, Thomas said something that surprised even himself. "I used to sit here alone every evening." Eliza listened quietly. He continued, "I thought that's how it would always be." Eliza looked at him gently. "And now?" she asked. Thomas looked at the second cup, then at her. "Now it's not." The wind moved softly through the fields. The sky slowly turned darker as night came. For a long time, Thomas had believed that nothing would change, that his life would remain quiet, distant, and unchanged. But Eliza's arrival had slowly broken that belief, not with big actions, but with small, steady moments. A few days later, something important happened. Thomas received a letter. It was about the ranch, an opportunity to expand, to grow, to build something more. Before, he would have ignored it, but now he didn't. That evening, he showed the letter to Eliza. "What do you think?" he asked. Eliza read it carefully. Then she looked up. "I think it's a chance." Thomas studied her face. "And if it fails?" he asked. Eliza smiled gently. "Then we try again." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. It was a small decision, but it meant something big. He was no longer afraid to move forward. As autumn arrived, the ranch began to change once more. New plans were made. New work began. And through it all, Eliza and Thomas worked side by side. One evening, as the sky turned golden again, they stood near the same fence where Eliza had once felt unsure. Now, everything felt different. "I never thought I would stay here this long," Eliza said softly. Thomas looked at her. "I'm glad you did." There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet understanding between them. In the town, people no longer whispered in surprise. They spoke with respect, because what they had seen was not something sudden. It was something real. A broken silence had turned into peace. A lonely place had become a home. And two lives, once uncertain, had found direction. And that was what truly shocked everyone in Dust Hollow. Not a dramatic moment, not a sudden change, but something far more powerful. A quiet story of patience, trust, and second chances. As the sun set once more over the wide fields, Eliza and Thomas stood side by side, looking toward the future. And for the first time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt right.